Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com here with the April 4th unbanning announcement. This is going to be kind of a mix between the unban and the Market Monday. So with the announcement, here are the banned and unbanned list. Eye of Ugin is banned. That is good news for the modern format because it's going to allow back those kind of grindy control decks back into the format that can start hating out the hyper aggressive decks like Infect and Burn and Affinity to a point. I think that Grixis gets a ton better now with Eye of Ugin out of the way. We can also start seeing some Jeskai control builds, even some Temur control builds, or Temur like more tempo grindy based Jund, Temur, Grixis. All of those three-color kind of grindy decks are back into the format. Those problems is all of those decks were terrible against the Eye of Ugin Eldrazi decks, because what made Eye of Ugin so good is it allowed Eldrazi to be both an early, mid, and late game deck. Eye of Ugin was pivotal to all three of those strategies. You could bust out the turn one cards basically for free. So if you had like two Mimics in your hand, the Eye of Ugin could get two Mimics out and then follow it up by like a turn two Thought-Knot Seer and then like a turn three Reality Smasher. And if somehow like a UI control deck was able to survive that, the Eye of Ugin late game could just start finding you a card per turn, like another Thought-Knot Seer per turn or another Reality Smasher per turn to start. Or even at that point, like the endless ones could be huge, like 7/7s, and it put a lot of pressure on the control decks. So I think Eye of Ugin was the right ban. The archetype is not dead by not banning the Eldrazi Temple, so I think that we will still see the Eldrazi archetypes. So I'm thinking that Eldrazi Temple might be a good pickup if you start to see Eldrazi Temples go down to under $1 or under $2. I think that the archetype is not dead. We'll start to see some of the, maybe like the mono black versions. I know the mono black versions really like the Eye of Ugin, but some of the decks that don't care too much about fast mana, more just about efficient mana, because there still is 4 of the Eldrazi Temples left, and there also is still all the Tron decks. So there's a deck going around called Eldrazi Tron that I think it still works out pretty good, because you can still get like a turn 3 with the Tron, or if you even have, if it takes you a while to assemble Tron, you still have the Eldrazi Temples as backup to start pumping out the early Eldrazi's, and then when you eventually do assemble Tron, you can start pushing out the bigger Eldrazi's from then. So I think that's smart not to completely kill the archetype by banning both of them. And I think with just one of the pieces, it's going to be much more fair of a deck. They give a great explanation about it here. You can go and check this out at Wizards' website of why they banned the Eye of Ugin. They even mention here that they are kind of sad that Eye of Ugin hurts the Tron decks. This makes actually Tron a lot better. Speaking of control, Tron was one of Control's worst matchups, just with the Eye of Ugin be able to tutor up each turn another colorless creature. So if you counter those early Wormcoil engines or whatnot, eventually they're going to get an Emrakul out, and now Tron doesn't have that angle. So I think Tron actually suffers a ton from the Eye of Ugin ban. So it's going to make the Grixis control and Jeskai control and like Temur control builds a ton better against those. So let's just talk about now the two unbannings. They're Ancestral Vision and Sword of the Meek. Those are two cards that I was kind of on the fence about. I particularly don't like cards that can draw 3 cards for basically 1 mana. I think that this really gives the control and mid-range decks, blue decks, a huge boost, which is maybe something they desperately needed. We'll have to wait and see how Ancestral Vision affects the metagame. Now, with the explanation on here, they do talk about Ancestral Visions and how in Legacy, most of the enablers are not available, as this was like Bloodbraid Elf or the Shardless Agent that was able to cascade into it to draw 3 cards, and a lot of the other ways just to set up Ancestral Visions through getting it out extremely early through like Brainstorm and Ponder. That way that you know by turn 4 or turn 5 you're going to be drawing cards. It was very, very efficient and modern. So we're going to talk about what I think Ancestral Visions is the deck that it's going to immediately go into, and then we'll actually talk about the Sword of the Meek unbanning. So Sword of the Meek, they say also doesn't have all the pieces that is played in where it gets played in Legacy. Actually, in Legacy, it's not even that prevalent. You see it every now and again in like Tezzeret decks. And let's just go ahead and check out the deck that Sword of the Meek. Sword of the Meek is comboed with the Thopter. It's the Thopter Foundry. So basically, between the two, if you sacrifice the Sword of the Meek, it comes right back into play onto the blue Thopter artifact creature. So you always are going to have a 2/3 flying artifact Thopter. And so it's just a really, really grindy combo. And then if you add Crack Clan Ironworks to the mix, then you basically can accelerate that combo, and I believe you can go infinite life with it. But it takes 3 pieces to do that. They're all extremely vulnerable to Stony Silence, so I highly suggest that if you haven't picked up your Stony Silences now, that you pick it up now. And that is a card that desperately needs a reprint. I think it's already hovering at $14. And so any other affinity or artifact-based hate card is going to gain a lot of more value in the format. Ancient Grudges, especially anything that exiles artifacts, so you need to exile the Sword of the Meek, is also going to be a lot more valuable in the modern format. So that's just kind of the I think Sword of the Meek also might work pretty decent in like a Pure Steel Paladin type deck, because every time you put a 1/1 into play, like a 1/1 living weapon, the Sword of the Meek will come back and attach to it. I don't know how well that works if Pure Steel actually does want it, but at least it gives that deck as well a little bit of a boost. So here's the deck in Legacy, the Tezzeret combo that sees play, and we don't have like Jace the Mind Sculptor, but a lot of these we still do have. Like this Transmute artifact can be Reshape, so Reshape is a pretty decent card to find the combo. So if people are really going into the combo, I think we should look into Reshape. It's from Darksteel. It is only $2.20 right now. And the reason I like Reshape, you can sacrifice the Sword of the Meek and then go find Thopter, the Thopter Foundry, and then you'll be able to sacrifice just another artifact to bring it back. I think this is the most, this is probably the easiest way to assemble the combo. Also another way to get the Sword of the Meek is, so Trinket Mage doesn't hit with 2, but is the Tezzeret Agent of Bolas is really good at finding, like looking at the top 5 cards of your library, and you can reveal an artifact. So it's a good way to sift through your deck to find the 2. There's also a good card with Thirst of Knowledge. You can go through 3 cards and discard 1 artifact. What makes Thirst of Knowledge so good with this deck is you can just discard the Sword of the Meek, because you're going to be getting it back through the Thopter Foundry. So I think that if you look at this deck, most of the cards are pretty much intact for this modern deck. You don't have access to Jace, don't have access to Force of Will, but the rest of them are good. So I think you could see a blue-black artifact kind of grindy control list with the Thopter Foundry and Sword of the Meek combination. We still do have the Ancient Ruins in the format. I don't know how much the not having the artifact lands or like these fast accelerators like Ancient Tombs and City of Traders will affect the deck, but I'm thinking that it's going to be a playable deck. Bitter Blossom is also very, very interesting with the Sword of the Meek, because at Bitter Blossom you can at least you can if you have some way to sacrifice the Sword of the Meek with Bitter Blossom, that means each turn you can get value out of sacking the Sword of the Meek. What is some other sack besides Crack Clan Ironworks? There's some pretty decent sacrifice a permanent or sacrifice an artifact to do something like Shrapnel Blast type cards, and then you can return it each turn back to the Bitter Blossom. You'll have a 2/3 flyer. So that's another card that I think is pretty interesting. But for this one, I really think the pickup for today's Market Monday would be Reshape. I think Reshape kind of plays a very similar role as the Transmute artifact, and it's just 4 mana to go tutor one of your pieces. So definitely pick up your Reshapes if you don't already have them. Alright, so the next one we're talking about is the Ancestral Vision. The deck that I like Ancestral Vision in the most is the Blue Moon. I think that it's perfect. Blue Moon wants to grind out the game. So you're going to try to slow your opponent down by casting Blood Moons and Spreading Seas, and eventually just getting there with your Pyroncron Nalar. But instead of Snapcaster Mage cannot cast the Ancestral Visions. Why that is because Ancestral Vision does not have a flashback cost. So when Snapcaster Mage enters the battlefield, you can cast an instant sorcery card. It gains flashback. So this is a card that cannot be cast. It has to be suspended, but you can force it to be cast through Cascade or through another card that is very similar to Cascade, which is Goblin Dark-Dwellers, that just says cast a card with converted mana cost 3 or less. Well, the converted mana cost is still 0, even though it doesn't have a quote-unquote casting cost. So instead of Snapcaster Mage in this deck, I would throw in some Goblin Dark-Dwellers, or just put some more Goblin Dark-Dwellers in like a Blue Moon deck. Ancestral Vision also gets much better in the Grixis control versions. As we'll look at any sort of electrolyzed deck, I think Ancestral Vision fits perfectly. And so let's see if there's a Grixis deck that's played in a while. Let's check out Jeskai Control. Jeskai Control. I think it would work perfectly. Goblin Dark-Dwellers is so lovely in this deck because you can cast back Electrolyze, you can cast back Lightning Helix. I actually like Goblin Dark-Dwellers in even a deck. So in the Mardu deck right now, because you have access to Kolgan's Command, Lightning Helix, Crackling Doom, and if you subtly splash blue for the Ancestral Visions, it gets a lot better. So any of these like Electrolyze type archetypes, I think is perfect for the Ancestral Visions. So it gives those time in mid-range, control, grindy, attrition-based strategy a huge boost. I think that these decks are going to, first of all, get what I said earlier, so much better with Eye of Ugin out of the way. And now we're going to be back into like a really grindy type format. So a lot of the decks that I didn't like, I couldn't stand. If you look at my top 3 cards I want to be banned in Modern, I think a lot of them already suffer. Affinity suffers a lot from these grindy. These are some very tough matchups for Affinity. Electrolyze is an incredibly good card against Affinity. White decks especially that now have access to Stony Silence are great against Affinity. And then if we go into like the Infect and like combo decks like Ad Nauseam or Grishel Shoal, control decks do very well. Anything that has a remand is incredibly good against a deck that tries to Simian Spirit Guide. Then you just remand whatever they're trying to do, and they've already wasted that resource. So any of these pieces that you think might be undervalued right now are a great time to pick up. Maybe Spell Snare is still at $7, $8 a piece is undervalued. That's crazy for an uncommon, but it's been only reprinted in Modern Masters, and then I believe Dissension was its early printing, and that's it. So this, you got to think of this card as a rare. Compared to like rares these days, there's probably less Spell Snares out there, for example, than there are Goblin Dark-Dwellers or Payan Karandalars. So an uncommon from back in the day is the equivalent of rarity as a rare from these newer sets. So I think Supreme Verdict is another great pickup. This card's been really increasing in value over time, and now gets so much better with the Eye of Ugin banning. Supreme Verdict can take care of any of the zoo-based decks. Ancestral Visions then allows you, if you have to suspend Ancestral Vision turn 1, and then you have to just kind of hold off with Supreme Verdict, it makes these control decks so much better. So anyway, this is my challenge to you. I want to see who can create what, or where you think Ancestral Vision is sort of the Meek fit in Modern, if there's some other things that I haven't quite touched upon. If people have been talking that Lantern Control will probably want the combo as an alternate win condition, I don't know if I quite believe that. Maybe Eggs, like an Eggshell, will want the sort of the Meek combo. But I think Ancestral Vision is the definitely the more interesting of the two. And I think it's just going to be a no-brainer, just shove into any of these like blue mid-range or control decks. But I'd really like the input of the community to see where, if there's any combos I might be missing with the two. This is nice to shape up the format. I'm a little bit leery of, or weary of actually unbanning Ancestral Vision. It might push we have this like really fine line we have to tread with these control decks. If we push it over the top with like what Treasure Cruise did, it makes the control and the tempo deck so efficient. And it usually is any card that can draw 3 cards for 1 mana, just pushes over the top. People are talking like Treasure Cruise was so too easy, but you still had to have enough delve cards, and it wasn't really turn 1 or turn 2 or turn 3. People were treasure cruising turn 4 to refill up their hand after they've used all the 1-for-1 cards, like the Thought Seizes and the Lightning Bolts and the Fork Bolts and the Electrolyzes and everything, and then Treasure Cruise would refill back up the hand. I think Ancestral Vision is going to play a very dangerous role, similar to Treasure Cruise, with especially the Electrolyze and Lightning Bolt decks. So that is my Market Monday. Pick up your reshapes. I think pick up any of your blue control pieces. I really like Goblin Dark-Dwellers. I really like the Supreme Verdicts and cards like Electrolyzes and whatnot as good specs right now, as I think they'll increase significantly in value. If you haven't picked up your Stony Silence, this card, they're not going to reprint it now that clues are a huge part of the standard meta. I don't think they want to kill clues right now, but we might see a Stony Silence reprint, not in the Eldritch Moon, but in the next set as a way to combat kind of the clue-based decks. But this card desperately needs a reprint at $12. Man, I should have picked these up a lot more heavy in paper. I think I only picked up 12 copies in paper when I told people to spec in them. But online, I picked up over 200 copies when they're 5 cents a piece, and you can see how expensive these guys. I got out of them mainly between $2.50 and six tickets a piece. So I wish I would have kept on to these a little bit longer, but it is what it is. Sometimes you need funds for Magic Online, and that was a card. Funny thing is I actually just barely sold my Ancestral Visions when they spiked because of people speculating they would be unbanned. So I actually sold out of my Ancestral Visions at one of the last huge spikes because I really didn't think they would be unbanned. But anyway, you miss some, you hit some, you miss some. Hope you enjoyed this Market Monday and this modern ban update. This has been Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com. Thanks for watching.